Welcome to Cross Section, conversations at the intersection of faith, news, and culture. We are excited to be on YouTube. Please subscribe to the Evangelical Alliance YouTube channel to never miss an episode.
Coming up in this week's episode of Cross Section, the team talk about the rise in Reform's popularity. They also talk about the fact that the government are looking to redefine Islamophobia and what does it look like to be a good Samaritan in public life. I hope you enjoy the episode. Hello and welcome back to Cross Section. It's an exciting day. We are all live together in the studio. The eagle-eyed among you will realise, well, if you're watching on YouTube, that Peter is not here. I'm back, which I'm delighted to be here, and I'm here with Alicia and Danny. Hello, both of you.
Whoop, whoop. Hello, everyone.
Well, Peter, I think is busy cycling across Rwanda or something like this. We get to have some fun.
Yeah, as you do. I mean, if you want to see what he's up to, I'm sure you can go check out his social medias and see his cycling journey. Peace Linus or something. You'll be able to find that, I assume. But yeah, so we are back. We are recording on Thursday morning live together in the office. And before we kind of go on to our main conversations, a couple of stories have caught our eye this week. The first one is that the prayer app Hallow has been banned by the EU. Danny, what's happened there? What's going on with that?
Well, it probably hasn't actually been banned, but certainly they've said that due to EU data restrictions, requirements to comply with various things, they're not going to be able to operate in EU countries. They've been working on different language services to serve other countries across Europe. And looks like they're not going to be able to do that anymore.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, it is serious. I saw that the founder of the app, Alex Jones, I didn't know about him before, but I was reading up about it, said that God will not be outdone. So that is a helpful reminder in all of that. But Alicia, were you familiar with the app, or is that something you've used before?
No, a friend passed on the story explaining, another kind of, or how it was framed. It's banned, it's religious persecution, that Christians can't share material within Europe. But reading the small print, as Danny rightly says, actually EU laws says that they don't like data that reveals privacy around religious identity, which I think is quite fascinating as a concept, because anyone who's engaged with the Children Wellbeing and Schools Bill, that is actually a requirement that is within this legislation, that home educators and tutors and education providers would need to provide details of children based on their protected characteristics. So I thought it was a kind of an interesting, they find themselves in a situation where they can't promote because of that, but yet in this country, that could become a key component moving forward in kind of education policy.
But we're not in the EU. So we should still be safe to be able to use it.
Very true.
Are there any Christian apps that you guys like? I mean, Alicia, you're on Soul. Is that a favourite or?
So cheeky. No, I wouldn't describe Soul as other dating providers out there for those who are single among us. But my favourite app is the Bible Project. I think its material on kind of the classroom and how they do long form, kind of really nerdy, geeky teaching, I think is amazing as a resource to faith and discipleship. So yeah, that's my favourite. Are you on Salt?
I'm not on Salt.
Okay.
No, neither. I do know about it. But we are trying to get Alicia to go on the live third wheel dates on YouTube anyway, but let us know if you agree. Danny, what about you? Any Christian apps that you're...
The boring part of me shouldn't be described as boring, is just YouVersion, the Bible. It's probably the one I use most often. Church Suite is probably the most useful one, organising my church diary, rotas, all of that. When I've got to swap with someone on the crash rota, Church Suite is very useful.
Yeah, I agree. I actually think, and this is part of a wider conversation, I've probably become slightly too dependent on my Bible app instead of having a physical Bible with me when I'm out and about, which is something to think about. But yeah, so just an interesting one. I guess we'll be kind of seeing what happens with that app and if how that plays out. The other thing that's kind of caught our eye this week is some polling that shows that Reform are now more popular than Labour for the first time since, I guess the election in July. They are now at 25% and Labour at 24% of people that would vote for them in an election. In fact, 60% of the people, only 60% of people that voted for Labour in July would now agree and say they'd do that again. Are people just fed up with our kind of the two main parties? What do you think is kind of...
I think it shows how short the Labour Party's honeymoon in government has been. People are already frustrated, but I think that reflects a wider trend against whoever is in power. I think there is frustration with the Labour government in particular, but there's also frustration with whoever's in power. You see that in different countries. So I don't think it's a surprise that their honeymoon's been so short. I think it's a challenge, certainly for the Conservative Party, that they've not been able to capitalise on this, that actually all of the sentiment has swung towards reform as the new, the different, the people who are able to capitalise on this disenfranchisement, this frustration with the political elites. A related reform story that caught my eye this week, they had a big fundraising dinner, £25,000 a head.
Wow.
They raised an awful lot of money. One of the guests there was the Duke of Marlborough, whose family home is Blenheim Palace. Now, Blenheim Palace was going to be the site of a big reform festival this summer. They were going to have this huge thing, raise tons of money with lots of people coming. And then apparently they can't do that because Blenheim Palace is owned and operated by a charitable trust. So the Duke of Marlborough, actually, it was his dad, created this structure because he didn't trust his son, who had various, I think he went to prison for drugs charges and other things, and basically didn't want his son to be in sole charge of Blenheim Palace. Anyway, created this charitable trust that runs and operates it. And because they're a charity, they can't do something that supports a political party. So it's been downgraded to a small drinks reception in the private apartment at Blenheim Palace now.
Wow.
Who knew? Fun fact.
Yeah. That is an interesting story. I didn't expect that. That's a fun extra bonus bit of insight that we've just had. What are your guys' predictions for what's going to happen with reform over the next few years?
I mean, how do you solve the problem of Farage is the ongoing question in the different political parties, both Labour and the Conservatives, because they're not gaining traction with the public. Kind of Keir Starmer's poll ratings are on the decline. You've got Kemi Badenoch that's not really engaging the masses with their kind of policy agenda going forward. So I'd imagine that reform will kind of continue to sweep up in kind of local elections as they come forward. I think the personality of Farage, whether you like it or not, he does grab the headlines for even more so than Ed Davey. We see and hear more about Nigel Farage, who only has 5 MPs in Westminster than we do the Liberal Democrats kind of party leaders. So I imagine that they're going to still dominate, and they're going to dominate until political parties address the core issues, which were the running topic of the last general election: the cost of living, migration, and the state of the NHS. The current government, in many ways, they're doing a review on the NHS and moving forward, so there's not many solutions there. Some of the budgeting decisions by the Chancellor of the Exchequer has been unpopular with business, as well as kind of charitable organisations, and many people are feeling the squeeze in every area of life. And Farage is dominating the narrative that migration is a reason why people are worse off. So until political parties address the issue of migration and the economics, his popularity is going to soar, I would imagine.
I think it's like Nigel Farage and Reform are able to play the role of the outsider, and they will continue to do that. No political party has a right to exist. No leader has a right to become the next prime minister. It doesn't have to go in turn. So I think you can't expect or assume that the Conservatives will start doing better again. The chatter about Kemi Badenoch has picked up. I just saw this morning lots of criticism of how she performed at Prime Minister's Questions. Where's the focus? How's she doing that? And as that carries on, people will look again to say, well, actually, is Nigel Farage going to be in a position to get a lot more seats in the next election? Yeah. Could you be looking at that? The next couple of years will be interesting. He was not happy that local elections next year are cancelled in many places due to changes in local authorities, creation of new unitary authorities. That means that they won't have as much of a chance to make the gains in May 25. I think looking ahead to 2026, elections to the Welsh Senedd will be fascinating. Reform are doing well in Wales. If they're able to win a significant number of seats there, that will be an interesting one. But I don't think at the moment that their rise will be challenged until they actually get into power. Not necessarily in Westminster, but maybe in local authorities or in other places. It is when someone actually has to handle power and govern, that's when people realise, hang on a minute, it's difficult. When they have to shift from being the outsider to being the insiders, actually operating with responsibility. And I'm not saying that they would necessarily do that badly, but that's when things start to hit. And I think for both the government and the Conservative Party, it's really hard to challenge reform right now because they're just the outsiders and they're able to play off that.
Yeah. I mean, so I was kind of reading about the main reasons that people are kind of sort of moving towards reform. And the main reason was the fact that they are different to Labour and the Conservatives. They want something new. Immigration was another big one. The other thing that I found really interesting was that the fifth reason was that they are seen as honest and trustworthy, which I guess is interesting, especially kind of we're seeing even more things about now, even that whole thing with Keir and that potential meeting with a voice coach or in 2020. Yeah, there's obviously just still so much distrust, isn't there, with our politicians? But yeah, it will definitely be an interesting one that we watch as that kind of unfolds over the next few years. I don't doubt that this won't be a conversation that does come up again in cross-section at some point. But yeah, kind of onto our next main conversation. Angela Rayner is currently planning to create a council on Islamophobia and is actually lining up, potentially Dominic Grieve to lead it. This is kind of sparking another kind of conversation about the freedom of speech, definition of this. Why is this a conversation that has come up time and time again? And yeah, is there a solution to it?
Yeah, for sure. So the news broke this week through the Telegraph, they announcing of this conversation of a 16-person kind of advisory group potentially to the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government on the issue of the definition of Islamophobia. And the challenge is particularly when it comes to policy, what does it mean to be Islamophobic? Now, in public discourse, the phrase is used regularly and often, but I am someone that is opposed to the use of the definition, yet whilst recognising that there are, particularly within this country, experiences of people from the Muslim community who have experienced prejudice and discrimination. So the definition that came out in 2018 that has been in conversation under the successive kind of the previous kind of Conservative government was that Islamophobia is rooted in racism and is a type of racism that targets the expression of Muslimness or perceived Muslimness. And much of the kind of arguments by different kind of campaigners, particularly those who are opposed to this, is in part by free speech, which we'll explore that, but also it's this language of expression of Muslimness and perceived Muslimness as if religious belief and ethnicity can be merged in the same way that the definition around anti-Semitism could be, which isn't the case. There isn't a uniform kind of ethnic kind of dimension to someone who is of Muslim belief. You can't compare someone who's Muslim from Pakistan or Indonesia or Nigeria or other parts of the world in the same way. And so there's that challenge of trying to use the template of the anti-Semitic definition, which is wholeheartedly correct. It is an ethnicity, it is a religion, but that doesn't translate in this direction. And ultimately, it's the issue of free speech. How can we criticize the rise of areas of the ideology and political Islam in UK politics, where there are legitimate concerns, and not be deemed as discriminatory or racist? And that's the tension point that's in the public discourse and why there has been a strong reaction to Angela Rayner's kind of, or the announcement of this kind of council to explore
I think
this.
that part of the issue is where is this tackling a kind of hatred of Muslims? So I think there is a very legitimate question of how do we tackle anti-Muslim hatred? And then, but would this law prevent people from criticising Islam and criticising the practice of Muslims or aspects of Islamic belief? And the feeling is that this proposed definition merges those things and would therefore restrict free speech in a way it shouldn't. It'll be interesting where the government goes with this. It brings my mind back to discussions nearly 20 years ago in 2006 when the Racial and Religious Hatred Act came in. It's possible the government may look to revise that in any changes to definitions, or they might look at how they can adopt a different definition of anti-religious hatred generally. But at that point, Parliament eventually agreed on a difference in definition between racial hatred and religious hatred. It put a higher bar for religious hatred. For racial hatred, it could be threatening, insultive, or abusive, but for religious hatred, it was only threatening behaviour that was counted. And it also put a particular provision in the law that protected free speech. That wasn't the government's intention. They wanted it to be much wider. The House of Lords rejected it. Eventually, Parliament agreed to that. But that protection is important because it does say that criticism, discussion of religious beliefs, even that which other people might find insulting or offensive, isn't criminalised. And offence is a very subjective thing. So I think it is important that any changes around religious hatred, any changes around the law there, do protect the ability of people to criticise even in ways which a holder of a belief might find offensive.
Yeah.
It's also worth talking about the kind of the chilling effect around the use in the term of Islamophobia. We spoke recently on this podcast about grooming gangs and the reality that the police didn't feel they could do their job, particularly in Rotherham and other places, because to call out someone of Pakistani heritage as the perpetrators of the serious sexual exploitative acts towards women and girls, or girls, children, we should say, was deemed as Islamophobic. And so it's the boiling over effect within the community in terms of how does definition impact areas of work where people are needing to engage with the reality where faith and ethnicity come into alignment, and actually there's a chilling effect because can I say that, or in the case of prosecution, can that be raised and it be justified, but would we be deemed as Islamophobic for doing that? So this is the kind of chilling effect that's happening within our culture at the moment in terms of criticising particularly the ideas of Islam as a belief and whether that fits within this definition. So it's not easy.
No, I mean, you can see why the government are having to kind of keep coming back to it, and it just isn't proving clear. Like, it's just, really complicated and difficult. Yesterday I was at a oral evidence session in Westminster on kind of social cohesion with Dame Sarah Khan. She released the Khan Review at the second half of 2024, and has done a lot of kind of stuff on that whole kind of area around sort of social cohesion. And she's also spoken about freedom restricting harassment, which is the way that we kind of self-censor ourselves and don't say because of the fear of what could happen. And she said something really that I found quite striking yesterday, that 7 out of 10 journalists are too scared to report on certain things. And 85% of the people that they polled see that this is happening in our country. And not just online, also in real conversations. And it just shows that there is such a kind of fear about what we can say, how we say it. And she also talks about how kind of being able to debate well is actually something that should be part of our democracy. And you kind of mentioned that as just...
I think it's really interesting because I think self-censorship isn't always bad. I think actually people should have a filter.
Yeah.
There is a place for wisdom. There's a place for saying some things in some occasions and not in other occasions. So self-censorship can sound like, oh, that's awful always. Actually, there's a place for self-censorship. It's just not feeling like you can never speak about certain things because of external pressure or rules, or actually, yes, sometimes it's more appropriate to talk about your faith than others. Sometimes there's roles that we might be in, which might mean that actually, at this point, I'm not going to talk about it. It's not appropriate, but actually on another occasion, it is appropriate. So I think it's that kind of nuance and that difficulty of like, how on earth do you put that into law? Whereas what we really want is a culture that has that wisdom, that understands that there are better and worse places and times to talk about things, but also promotes and encourages the freedom to actively and sometimes passionately disagree. And that's okay. So I think you end up getting into the weeds of how on earth do you legislate for this sort of thing? And you just can't, because the more and more you try and put rules in place for it, the more and more you end up with that chilling effect, rather than being able to rely on a culture that encourages free speech, encourages wisdom, encourages graciousness between people. Yeah, when you have to legislate for everything, it just doesn't work.
No, absolutely. And the other kind of part that it's been part of my learning and reflection in terms of how does it impact my faith witness and understanding not just of the Muslim community, but also those who were Muslim who have converted to Christianity, and actually learning more about their cultural heritage, how they raise up. The decision to follow Christ came with a cost. And I think there's definitely a learning for the church that, yes, engage in the politics of it, but actually let's engage in the reality that there are brothers and sisters within the UK who have made a decision to follow Christ, being brought up within kind of both a Muslim culture and faith beliefs that's come at a cost to them, and to learn from them actually how to engage with those in our society who have a different belief system to us, but also to understand the price and challenge that they made in order to make that kind of faith kind of conversion over to Christianity. So there's implications for the church as well as kind of our politics and our laws. Yeah,
that's really helpful that you brought that up, and actually that kind of leads to my final question, which is on this: how as Christians can we be praying for these conversations, for kind of what's going on in Parliament, but also for ourselves?
Well, I think we need to pray for wisdom. I think we need to pray for wisdom to know when to speak up, when it's important to speak up. I think we need to pray for the decisions in Parliament and in government that do protect our freedom of speech, that we do promote and encourage a society where we can speak, where we can criticize, but also where we can love each other, and where we can show that, and we can show graciousness, and we can be open to criticism of our own beliefs, and acknowledging we might not be happy when people criticize or offend us, but that is part and parcel of living in a free society. So I think we need to pray for the decisions, but we also need to really pray for wisdom.
You are listening to Cross Section, the podcast where we discuss all that is going on in the news, in politics, in light of being Christians. Please do get in touch with us at the email address, cross.section@eauk.org. We really want to hear from you. We want to hear what stories you want us to cover. There are so many things going on that we could choose from. You might be looking at the news thinking, why are they just not talking about this? Well, let us know. You can even just get in touch to talk about who your favourite presenter is, whether or not you like Danny's jumper. He's wondering if you should keep it. So.
Well, I'm definitely keeping it. I've had it a while, but I don't wear it very much.
We thought it was new, but he just doesn't wear it very often. No. So, these are the kind of highbrow conversations we have in the office. So please do get in touch, follow us on social media. But I'm going to move us on to our final conversation, which you may have seen kind of stuff going on X or in the news about sort of spat that happened between Vance, the vice president in the US, and Rory Stewart. Danny, I'm just going to come straight to you. What has happened? Why are they in the news?
So JD Vance, the vice president of the United States, made some comments in an interview, and then Rory Stewart decided to pick a fight with him on X, and it's kind of snowballed from there. JD Vance is a Catholic. He converted to Catholicism. But in his opening weeks as vice president of the United States, he has been present and given speeches at the March for Life. This week, he was at the International Religious Freedom Summit, I believe in Washington, DC. And he's made a lot of comments about his faith and about how that works out in practice. He was responding to criticism of changes to how US funds development aid. And he was basically saying that a Christian perspective is there should be a right ordering of our loves that prioritizes those closest to us, and then it basically goes outwards from there. And he was criticizing the left, this is how he framed it, as flipping that around, of prioritizing those furthest afield at the expense of the family and the neighbor. Rory Stewart said, hang on a minute, have you read your Bible? We are called to love everyone. And it kind of escalated from there.
Wild. It's wild. I think my observation and kind of, it's fascinating, not just that conversation took place, that Rory Stewart's looking at an interview that's being covered by JD Vance, and then JD Vance is then using X to come back at Rory Stewart to question his IQ level, which I do think 110 is still quite substantial. But the talking point is then I've seen how that conversation, clickbait, has then filtered out into different media outlets. I saw Novara Media, which is, I would say, left of centre and some on different political issues, talking about actually what's the role of faith in the public square and is that right? And then they were quoting different verses and letters from the Epistle of James and all of this. And I just think it's just fascinating that a story normally where people are like Christians shouldn't be speaking in the public square, keep their faith private, then became a news story where, again, it's another opportunity for Christians and churches to be bold in offering a Christian perspective on different issues. I guess the learning for me is don't take verses to back up your political convictions, because I think in many ways that is what J.D. Vance did. I'm not saying he's wrong. And equally, that's what Rory Stewart did as an Anglican, to use the kind of the John passage to back up his view. I think scripture is more holistic in that. And, you know, if you read further on where Jesus is engaging with Pilate, he speaks of that my kingdom is not of this world. So as Christians, there is how we engage in the public square. It needs to be nuanced, it needs to be brave, it needs to be bold, but it needs not to pick verse to back up your position. We need to engage in subject matters that are not as binary as they are. But I think as a conversation point, I found it fascinating that for at least a week, different media outlets are talking about scripture in the public square, which is always a good thing.
And it is fascinating. So one of the issues at the heart of this is what's called Ordo Amaris, the ordering of
incoming
loves.
The highbrow.
Yeah. Well, this is the highbrow bit. Just wait for what's going to come in a moment. Augustine in The City of God, book 15, Graham Tomlin noted in his article around this issue. We'll make sure that's in the show notes. It is a question of, well, what is the right ordering of our loves? How do we do that? And I think it is a challenge to say, well, actually, yes, the criticism that, well, of course, some people, like, you naturally do have a love for your family that is different to people you don't know. But how do we navigate that? One of the classic philosophical problems called the trolley dilemma. And you have a trolley bus hurtling down the road and it's going to crash and kill everyone. But you have the option, you could push it down a side road, but you would then run over someone. So do you intentionally run over someone and kill them, or just let it go to its end when it's going to crash? Well, actually, a utilitarian logic says, well, you turn and you kill the one person, and then you take it a stage further. Yeah, but what if that one person is your son? Do you still do that? And it does cause you to think. And I think there is a naturalness to some of this that says, well, yes, we do love our family. But I think the challenge, certainly to the US, and I think we may come on to talk about aid spending as well, there should be enough to go around. And this is where I go from the highbrow Augustine to one of my children's favourite books called The Littlest Littlest Yakling. And in that, a small girl yak is concerned because her mum is about to have a baby yakling. And she's worried that there won't be enough love to go round. And Mummy Yak comes along and rubs out the edges of the heart that she had drawn and says, our heart grows. There is enough love for everyone. And I think that is actually going back to Graham Tomlin. One of the points that he made and that others have made is that actually the right ordering of loves. In the parable of the Good Samaritan, we're called to love the Lord our God and love the neighbour as ourselves. Our love for God actually helps us to expand our love for our neighbours. So it isn't just our family. It isn't just the people in immediate proximity. It's the people around them and around them again. And actually that's where our love should express itself further than just our family bounds and those who are like us or who we know. And I think that's the challenge. How you then translate that into policy is much harder.
It's definitely the hurdle. I think CBP should come for you for the kind of the storytelling. I thought that yak story is beautiful.
The bedtime story time. Yeah. Do the audio of that.
Maybe.
But yeah, and we looked at Jesus, who was the most radical in the way he loved and loved those that weren't loved by anyone in society and were ignored. And that is the example that we look to. And obviously we are not Jesus, but that is what we are striving towards. But yeah, I when it comes to policy, that's confusing. That's too much for my brain to kind of navigate. But yeah, let's kind of move on to the kind of conversation around foreign aid, because that's something else that has kind of been running alongside this sort of simultaneously. yeah, Alicia, what's happened with USAID?
So it's a part of kind of President Trump's wider agenda through the Doge committee to kind of through Elon Musk to find government savings and review and, you know, to find efficiencies. Is the UK, not the UK, the US taxpayers' money being well spent? And one of the first kind of parts of kind of spending that they're looking to review is around USAID, looking to cull that. And it has deep impact in terms of how much does US foreign aid go to humanitarian efforts overseas. And it has direct impact. Looking at Christianity Today, they're saying that projects in about 130 countries are impacted, from Kenya, Vietnam to Ukraine. There are many kind of Christian kind of organizations that are impacted by that. For us in the UK, we would be familiar with Samaritan Purse, World Vision, a number of others, Catholic Relief, and so on and so forth. So it's having direct impact in terms of kind of Elon Musk has kind of described USAID as a criminal organization. And for him, that's his justification for stopping kind of government funding moving forward. And so whilst the legitimate question at the start, how is US taxpayers' money being spent overseas? In this instance, US taxpayers' money is being used to vaccinate and support and to kind of provide local economies. Many are kind of development aid workers that have the cultural competency and understanding in the language that are supporting the poorest of the poor within those various nations. And now they're impacted because they're not receiving US kind of funding. So that's the negative side of this kind of government direction of travel. But as rightly Danny I was talking before, there's also another agenda within USAID where some kind of funding is used to support different ideologies. And so that's another justification for why the government is tackling that as well.
And I think that's part of the interesting question of that, is that aid always has agendas, or at least it often ends up coming with agendas, like what policies does it support? What groups does it promote? Who is delivering the aid? JD Vance, again, in his talk to the International Religious Freedom Summit, if I've got that right, was talking about aid being used to fund atheists. Well, that's not necessarily, actually, in terms of international religious freedom, atheists need to be as free as Christians and other faiths to practice what they believe. But aid it's not as neutral as that. So I think some examination of actually, well, what is being funded is helpful and is valuable. But the collateral damage of this approach is huge. These agencies are having to lay off staff because not only is there a 90-day moratorium on any funding, but also they're not getting paid for work that they've been done previously. The immigration executive orders that the presidency have issued mean that those bodies that are involved in kind of resettling refugees that are coming into, and this includes legitimate people who have had asylum claims met, they've lost funding for the work that they're doing. So it's having a huge impact on the work of a lot of Christian organizations. One of the related things is actually, and there's been some saying, oh, well, this is just the charity sector's being made into an arm of the state. Actually, this is why we need to cut the funding. It's become part of the blob. It's the bloated government. The NGO sector is all part of that. But one of the reasons often charities and NGOs are funded is because they can do things more efficiently than the state can. They can reach places that the state can't. Actually, that's one of the arguments we've often made for why Christian charities and organizations are great partners to deliver in local communities, because they can do things the government can't. So actually, it may be that funding these groups is the more efficient way of using money, and yet they just get lost in all of this.
Yeah, so I mean, huge kind of ripple effects that will be seen, I guess, across the world. And yeah, those kind of examples that you shared, Alicia, there will be a lot of people that are directly feeling this. There'll be a lot of people without work. So it's definitely something that we should be praying for. And yeah, I think if there'll be a lot of situations that we aren't even aware of, kind of the impact that will be had. But yeah, just praying as this whole kind of conversation gets worked out and they do think about what they want to be spending their money on. Yeah, we just pray that it is in a way that serves people well. Do either of you have any kind of final thoughts on that?
No, I think the the great kind of summary of the order of loves and Augustine's kind of input. I think as Christians, what Christ challenges us is to not love within our echo chambers, that we are to have great concern for the global church. And here is a case in point for which different elements of the global church, whether in community or through kind of international aid that are founded on kind of Judeo-Christian principles, a Christian ethos in their makeup, are directly impacted. So us in the UK need to be mindful of that and interceding and praying and caring for that. But then it comes back to that other point that I raised earlier in the episode, that the kingdom for which God is wanting to bring into the earth cannot be legislated for, and it's very it's impossible. We're talking about the kingship and kingdom of Jesus. I don't think any political party could put that in a manifesto and for it to work efficiently. So I think God is very much opening our eyes and encouraging the church wherever we work, whether it's in health, whether it's in education, whether it's politics, wherever he has placed us, that we have a responsibility to pray for, but also to play our part in seeing that kingdom realized in imperfect and impossible circumstances. And that's forever the journey and direction of travel until he comes again. So yeah, it's not an easy space, but one that we should be confident for and to be bold for.
Yeah.
Alicia said it well.
Yeah, agreed. I think there actually, interestingly, is a bit of a thread that's run through these conversations of just the way we should be thinking about other people. There's so much going on as well, but I'm just going to finish with actually John 15:12. My command is this: love each other as I've loved you. But yeah, thank you so much for listening to this episode. We aren't going to be recording next week, but we will be back the week after. So yeah, take care. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.
Hi, Alicia here. Thank you for checking out this episode. If you like it, please make sure to subscribe or share with a friend and leave a review. Till the next episode, take care and God bless.